Hi, I'm Angie Brown with buildingbetterleaders.org. I am your leadership coach and learning facilitator. Do you ever watch crime shows? Have you ever listened to the detectives where they're interviewing different people, the eyewitnesses? Have you noticed that sometimes the eyewitnesses tell different stories? Why is that? Well, in today's video, we are still in what I call the conflict house, and now it's time to explore the rooms. Our first stop is called the What Happened room. In this video, you will learn why this room isn't as simple as it seems and how we can actually navigate this room in the conflict house. For more leadership tips and techniques, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then be sure and click that little bell so that you get notified each week when a new video arrives. So what happened? Remember those crime stories I asked you to think about? We're not talking about crime stories today. What we are talking about is how we can be in this what happened room and have multiple accounts of what happened. Have you ever listened to two people in conflict tell you what happened? And while there are some similarities, sometimes the stories are not exactly the same. How can that be? Why is that? Now, before we go too much further, I want to remind you that in the conflict house, it's important that you enter with a curious heart and mind. And if you're not sure what that means, if you're not sure what I'm referring to, be sure and go back and watch part 1 of this conflict series so you can understand what I mean when I talk about how we enter the conflict house. So we're in the conflict house. We're in the room called What Happened. Now, I promised to tell you how we could all show up with often different stories. Well, the truth is, it's because we come with our own stories. We all come to conflict with years of stories that come from our childhood. They come from our previous work environment. They come from different experiences that we've had. Earlier this week, I was facilitating a conflict resolution class for a client of mine, and I paired up the leaders in the room, and I asked them a simple question. I asked them to share with their neighbor, their partner, what their childhood holidays were like. They could pick Christmas, they could pick Hanukkah, they could pick birthdays, whatever it was. What I wanted them to do was share how they had these celebrations in their family. Now, as you can imagine, not everybody shared the same experience. I can tell you in my family, birthdays included literally my mom, my dad, my brother, and maybe one or two friends of mine. They were often held at my family home, and they were kind of quiet celebrations. Now, I know people that when they celebrate their childhood birthdays, it included the pony or trips to a farm or the bounce house or whatever happened to be popular at the time, but it was a bigger celebration that included extended relatives and extra classmates and whatnot. That was not my experience. So if you can just imagine for a moment how when we show up just in relationships, I come and I meet a partner and I want to have a relationship with them and we're trying to merge those experiences. Imagine what it's like when you're on a team of people who come from different backgrounds and diverse ethnicities, and they are trying to merge the childhood stories, the stories that are in their heads. We're also trying to merge the rules that we have in our head. That's a whole different subject. If you hear yourself saying, I should this or so-and-so should do that, that should tells you that you're carrying around a rule in your head about how things should happen. And I actually challenge you to ask yourself where that should comes from. Because when we talk about conflict, that's sometimes what happens. My story, my rules show up. Your rules and your stories will show up. So it's easy to find ourselves in conflict unless we do some more digging. The second thing that happens when we are in this conflict house, specifically the what happened room, is oftentimes we assume the other person's intent. And most of the time, we assume it's bad intent. Now, I want you for just a moment to ask yourself a question. What would happen, literally what would happen, if we go into the conflict house assuming good intent? I challenge my coaching clients. If we assume good intent, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And I wait. Most of the time, when logic kicks in, they'll tell me, if I assume good intent, I am in a better place when I am in this conflict. If I assume good intent with my employees, I have already established a level of trust, or I am extending trust to them, assuming their good intent. I'll tell you that it's not very often that people actually come trying to have bad intent. They may have behaved that way. It may have had a bad impact. However, I assume good intent. The third thing that happens when we're in the what happened room in the conflict house is that our stories, our rules, our side is normally told in our favor. Now, I have been in HR for decades, and I have noticed when we do employee relations or when we're listening to sides of a story, of course, each person's side of the story is beneficial to them. Who doesn't tell it that way? It's important, though, when we're in the what happened house, that we understand that we understand that there's a slight bent on their side of the story being in their favor. It does not make your employee a bad employee or an awful person. It just means that it's human nature. So I would love to hear your comments below. Be sure and comment and let me know what you think of what I've said so far about the what happened room. This is an important room, and so I want to make sure that we are all in this together and having these dialogues. So now that we're aware of this room and how our stories and rules show up, how do we actually go about navigating the what happened room? How do we get that room from being your side versus my side into seeking solutions that solve problems? Well, once again, the way out of the room and the way we navigate that room is to be curious. I'd like to offer you 2 questions that you can ask your employees or people that you happen to be in conflict with so you can navigate this room better. The first one is, what information do you have that I need to know? You see, usually we don't know all of the information. I cannot tell you the number of times employees would come to my office as the HR person and they would tell me a story. And earlier in my career, I would jump up thinking I had all of the information and I would go about solving the problem. What I found often was that the intent, the story, the rules were all different. And so over the years, I have learned to use this question. Tell me what you know that I need to know. Is there more? Because clearly the other person has their own stories and they might have more information that I don't have. So it's just a great question to ask. The second question is, would you be willing to share how you see it? Now, why would we ask that question? The reason we want to ask that question is because it invites the other party to tell us more. Often people will tell us just enough and then they go away or we dismiss them. It's important that we ask, we invite, we want to be curious. And so we want to ask that question. Would you be willing to tell me more or to tell me how you see it? Being curious is a great leadership trait. It teaches us and it teaches the other party that we are genuinely and authentically interested in them. Stay curious. Ask questions. Make sure that your mindset is coming from a place of learning. It's a great way to let your employees know, gosh, I don't know everything. I don't have to know everything. That's why I've hired you. If this video has been helpful, I encourage you to like it and share it with fellow leaders. This week, your challenge is when you hear a story, when you hear those rules, the should-haves, go ahead and ask those curious questions. Let me know how it works in the comments below. And thank you for watching.